И мы снова в эфире. Это третий поток конференции Snow One. И наш следующий докладчик Мала Гупта. Мала работает девелопер-адвокатом в JetBrains. Она Java-чемпион и автор нескольких книг издательств Manning, Pact и O'Reilly. Она является международным докладчиком на отраслевых конференциях и имеет более чем 20-летний опыт работы в индустрии программного обеспечения. Она активно поддерживает сертификацию Java как путь к карьерному росту. Мала тесно сотрудничает с сообществами разработчиков. Она возглавляет группу пользователей Java в Дели и, являясь активным сторонником организации Women in Technology, она также продвигает инициативы Women Who Code в Дели для расширения участия женщин в сфере IT. Встречайте, Мала Гупта! Hello, Mala. How are you? How's weather in New Delhi?
Hi, Taki. Good to see you. And surprisingly, today we have much warmer day in Delhi, and I'm so happy to wear my Java 25 years T-shirt today.
I believe it's much warmer than in Novosibirsk. It's
Sorry.
It's interesting that 2 days ago I participated in IntelliJ IDEA conference and Mala was my host. Now we switched the roles and I'm hosting Mala instead. Mala, how do you feel about the IntelliJ conference? Was it great?
Absolutely. First of all, as I said, it's interesting that we are switching our positions now, and it's great to have you as my host. So we had 2 days of conference for IntelliJ IDEA. So that was IntelliJ IDEA Conf, the first ever conference which we hosted to celebrate 20 years of IntelliJ IDEA. And it was absolutely amazing. The speakers were great, the sessions were great, and we had a lot of positive comments, feedback from the audience. So we all loved it.
Super. You are going to speak about new versions of Java. What do you think about Java evolution pace? Is it too slow or too fast, or probably just perfect?
I think it's good because when we talk about the pace of evolution and the pace at which we developers get to use it, so I think there is a confusion there because Java is still evolving at the same pace that it was earlier. It was just the time or the pace when we developers got to use those features. Now the release cadence is 6 months. So the developers get to use these features much earlier, but earlier, because of a non-predictable release cadence, the developers kind of got to use the features, I think, between a difference of 2 to 3 to 4 years. So the evolution remains the same. The pace of evolution, it's the release cadence that has changed.
Great. So I guess it's time for the talk. Please, Mala, let's start.
Thank you, Taki. So, hi everyone. Today I would be talking about some of the new language features from the recent Java versions. I would talk about what these features are, why you need them, and how you can use them in your applications. And before we get started, because I believe Tagir has already introduced me, so we don't need the slides, but because I don't know Russian, no, but I think Tagir has done a good job, so I would just skip these slides on the introduction. Now, as Target mentioned about the Java's release cadence, before I start talking about the new language features, I want to talk a bit about the Java's release cadence, how it has changed and how it impacts all of us. So Java 8 was released in March 2014, Java 9 after a gap of 3.5 years in September 2017. And with Java 9, the release cadence changed to 6 months. So now we have a new predictable release cadence, which means a new version is released every March and September. And we are about to see Java 16 next month, which is amazing. How do you think that this new predictable release cadence impacts the Java features? I believe that the Java features get the spotlight that they deserve. They are not obscured by the star features. By the way, who remembers the compact strings which were released in Java 9? Or do we only remember the module system? For developers, of course, we get to use the new features as soon as they are done, and they can hop on to the release train in 6 months and we get to use them. For enterprises, it's great, I believe, because they can take an informed decision. They can check out the features of the language, features of the Java platform, which would make a lot of difference to the applications that they are using. And then, with all that information under their belt, they can take an informed decision when they want to move to the next version. Now, let's talk about the latest Java language feature in Java 16. I would cover seal types, records, pattern matching for instance of, and two other recent additions, which is text blocks and switch expressions. So let's start. Before we start with the language features, in this session, as I mentioned, I would only be covering the language features in Java, the recent language features, but there is a lot to Java than just the language features. And you can use these links to find out more about them. On this release notes, I really like to check out how the language specification has changed. And of course, this link is, you can use this to find out what other JEPs or the Java enhancement proposals went into Java 16. This is one of my favorite because as a developer, I really like to check out the differences in the Java API from version 15 to version 16. So you can check out this link and see how the API has changed. The changes are highlighted, I would say, very nicely because you can have different background colors for additions, removals, and deletions. So I highly recommend that you check it out. So now let's talk about the first language feature from Java 16, which is sealed type. It was introduced in Java 15 and it continues to be a preview language feature in Java 16. I will talk a bit about what a preview language feature is towards the end of my session. So let's get started with what seal types are. And to do that, I would hop on to my IDE, which is IntelliJ IDEA. And I'm using the latest version of IntelliJ IDEA, which is 2021.1, the early access program. The beta would be released next month, and we would see the production version soon. So let me hop on to my editor. Yes. So seal type. What do you understand by the word seal? I connect it to something that I want to secure, something that I want to restrict the access to. Similarly, a sealed class in a Java language, the syntax allows you to restrict what are the classes or interfaces can extend or implement your classes and interfaces. But why do you do that? As I said, I connect the term seal with security and with restriction. The same applies to the purpose of creating these types. When I want to model the hierarchies that I have in my application, I want to have more secure hierarchies. I want to limit which other classes or interfaces can extend them. I want to do that in a declarative manner. So let's see an example on how we can do that. Let's talk about a simple application which let's say is created for gardeners, which gives them information about a set of plants. And the application that I want to create, it only talks about, let's say, a set of plants. I could be talking about herbs, shrubs, climbers. I don't want to talk about other categories of plants, let's say some aquatic plants or the plants that grow in the desert. There's nothing about those plants. It's just that the application that I want to create, I'm not looking to cater to that set of plants. So let me kind of demonstrate that by creating a class. Let me say I have a class and the name of the class is plant. And what I want to do next, let's say I have a set of other classes, which is herb, shrub, and climber and cucumber. And these set of classes, this extend my class plant. So how do we want to use that? So let me hop on to the other class where I say uh, using the seal types. Okay, so I did not delete this is kind of embarrassing. I'm supposed to code this one, right? Oh my god. So this one is, I know these are just the placeholders. I'm supposed to kind of fold the code so that you don't get to see what's in there, but that's okay. Happens. Life coding. What can possibly go wrong? Okay, so I assume that I have a method where I would like to process the value that I pass to this method process type, which accepts an instance of class plant. What can I do there? I can say if plant is an instance of, let's say I want to say herb, then what do I want to do? I want to return this value from this method. What if I say else if plant is an instance of, what are the other options that we have? We have a shrub. Now I want to return for the shrub. I have a method which is shrub prune, and then I say else. What are the other options that we have? We have cucumber, and okay, so we have plant instance of cucumber. Then what do we want to do? We want to return. I know it's getting a bit tedious, but don't worry, we are just there. So I say if plant is an instance of climber, I want to return climber.so. Now here comes the tricky part. What if the plant is none of these types? What do you do then? So this is kind of my favorite because we all have done that. So we have a print statement where I say the control cannot reach here. How many times have you done this? If you already have, please don't do that. Control cannot reach here. And then we kind of return a random value, 0, -1, 1, whatever. So what is the problem with this code? When I was trying to, of course, the problem area is this. What happens if I don't get an instance of the classes that I just showed to you? What if any developer kind of adds another derived class of plant? But as I mentioned earlier, I don't want to cater to other kind of plants like the ones that grow in desert or under the ocean. So what I'm looking at is not reusing of my classes for my business model. I'm looking at securing the model that I have for my business. So this is how the seed classes can help. And also, when we have an exhaustive list, it's easier to check, are we, because in this case, if I just drop this else part, I have no way to check whether I'm exhaustively checking whether I'm addressing what happens if this is an instance of cucumber. I don't have any way to check that now. We don't have this even now, but pattern matching, for instance, of would be extended to work with switch expressions in a future Java version, and then probably we can kind of see that part for implementation in the language. So how can I restrict with the other classes from extending my class? So let me go back to my class, and I could say, so I would be using some shortcuts when I'm demonstrating the code, and the shortcuts would flash towards the bottom of my screen, and I would not be addressing those shortcuts, but when they flash, you would be able to see them. The other thing, I'm using Java 16 for this demonstration. So when you go to your project structure, the project SDK should be 16. Of course, you can download JDKs from IntelliJ IDEA, but 16 would not be available now because it goes GA next month. And the project language level should be 16, which is seal types. Okay, now let me go back to my class plant. So I can say Alt and Enter, which is context actions in IntelliJ IDEA, and I can say seal class. Where is it? This is weird because yesterday I did that. Okay, that's okay. So I can, did I change the language level? Yes, I did when I was modifying it. Okay, so what did I do now? Okay, so now I got my context action back. So I can say seal class, and when I do that, class plant is seal, and all the derived classes, they have this non-seal modifier, which of course I can change. The derived class could be either non-seal, they could be final, or they could be seal again. So I want to define shrub as non-seal, which essentially means that it's open for being extended by the other classes. That's kind of giving the freedom and power to the developer, because we are sealing class plant, but we are allowing one of the subclasses to be non-seal. So there's a bit of freedom which is given to the developer. And this one, I want to define it as a seal class. So derived class could also be seal class. If this happens, I should define which other class can it extend. And of course, I need to again make it either final, sealed, or non-sealed. All the source file of all these classes is in the same source file. Sorry. All the classes are defined in the same source file. So I don't need a permits clause here, because it is assumed that if they are in the same file, that's what the hierarchy looks like. But if they are in separate source files, then I would need the permits clause. So then I would say these are the classes which are permitted by the hierarchy, which is permitted to extend the class plant. Now let me go back to my class and see how we can. So as of now, what I did was there's another thing about the C classes. What happens if we do not want a class to be extended by other class? I can define that class as final. The opposite is a non-final class which can be extended by any other class. Of course, there are the modules and the packages by which we can limit the accessibility of a class and make it, if a class is not accessible, it cannot be extended. But sealed classes and interfaces, they decouple the accessibility from the extensibility. So class plant could be public, but still when you have the control over which other classes can define it. So we are decoupling both of those. Now let me go back to this one. So because the if clause is defined that way, we really can't do much here. But in one of the future versions, you can see something like this. Of course, as I mentioned, this will not work in this version, but when pattern matching is extended to switch statement, you would be able to iterate on the types of plant and then return a value, something like this. And it would work kind of the way the constant values for an enum work. So when we have an exhaustive list, then we don't fall into the trap of not checking all the values or expecting I would say, existent value or non-welcome value. I don't know. I'm missing it right now. Okay, so this is what the seal types are, and they can be used. Similarly, so we just saw an example of seal classes. So similarly, you can define a seal interface. So this is an interface which permits this interface and class to extend it. So similar concept and everything goes similar. So now let me go to okay. I've already covered how the preview language feature or the IntelliJ IDEA configuration works in the project settings. Records. Now, so this one is kind of my favorite because I love this analogy. Imagine that you walk into a shopping place and you want to shop trousers for you. And what you see is trousers are all of the same size. So, depending on your size, the trouser could be big, tight, small, and if you are lucky enough, that might fit you perfectly. What if it doesn't? You alter them. And this is what, as developers, we have been doing with the regular classes when we need, let's say, aggregation of data or the data classes. Imagine you need a class which is just a wrapper of a set of data, but you would use a regular class, add the fields to it, define the getters, setters, and the other methods from the object class like toString, hash code, and equals. Not anymore. Java has a new compact way of declaring your data as data, which is records. So, what is the next slide? Okay, so now let me hop on to my editor and IDE and see what we have here. Okay, so this is a new type of declaration. Let me give you an example how you would like to use that. Imagine I have this class where I want to, let's say, store and retrieve the details of a person to a text file, and then I want to retrieve the value. What options do I have? Imagine you did not have the records. So what would you do? You can say create class person for me. It says, okay, I let me create the class person, and you define the fields. You say the field names are name, and then you have private, final, int, age. I can generate the constructor, and I can also generate, let's say, the getter methods. I want the getter methods for both of them. And what else is remaining? I just generate the equals in hash code. What else? And the toString method. So which is good as well. So I could use my IDE to generate all that code, and that was quite simple and easy. But the problem here is the code is written once but read many a times. And there is no way that any other developer would come in and they would read the code and they would know that this is just a wrapper for the name and age for a person. So, how do we get around that? Is there a way to kind of get around this part? Uh, Decrease the number of lines that we have, still make it clear to anyone who's reading that? Yes, we do. So let me delete this class and okay, I'm back to this file, and now I can choose to create person as a record. So I can say create record person. Okay, and what I do here is I can say string name and int age. That is it. Once you define your data class, your record as like this, using the record keyword here, this is all you need to kind of get the same functionality you had by defining class person as a regular class. And by default, this gets the default implementation of the toString, hash code, and equals method. Um, Let me show you the, okay. So first, let's run this and see if I can write this data of person and read it from the text file. I'm sorry, I missed doing that with the regular class, but we all know that that's kind of possible using the person class or the regular class. Oh, that should give me an error because not of this reason, but because I guess I missed. Okay, so let me run that again. I think I missed implementing the serializable interface. Let's see how that goes. And if it doesn't work, of course, I will have to go back and implement the serializable interface to that. Okay, so the error that I get is not serializable exception. Oh my God, that's a tongue twister. So now let me go back and see where I can get hold of my class. Then I can say this implements the serializable, yes, interface. Then I go back here. I keep forgetting the shortcut because I'm live coding, but that's okay. I can also use the mouse. Sometimes it's okay, but normally I don't use that. Okay, so now this is done and we can print the values as you just saw. So this is kind of interesting. And the other thing I would like you to notice is that it was easy to instantiate a record, and you would do that like any of your regular classes. So you don't have to change a lot of your habits. What else can we talk about for the records? Yes, the default constructor. In this case, it's easy for me to generate the constructor, and I could validate the values that are passed to a record the way I would do that for a regular class. Let me say, I say if age uh, age is less than 0, what I want to do, I want to throw a new illegal argument exception. Then I say age is less than 0. So this, I can do this one. I can also change the constructor if I want to uh, compact constructor to canonical, if that's what you want to do. And I could also delete redundant constructors if that this is okay. Now, the other interesting thing is if you are working with records, you're using a later version, of course, but what if you want to switch back to, let's say, a version which doesn't has records, let's say Java 10 or 8, then IntelliJ IDEA gives you a very convenient way to do that. You can convert a record to a class, but before I do that, let me also show you what else can you add to a record. The fields are not allowed in a record. So if I say string full name, that is not allowed because you are using the components of a record here to define what it would store, the data it would wrap. So it doesn't make sense to define a field inside the record. But of course, you can define static variables, which is allowed. You can also define static methods. You can say static int get count, and then you can say it's happening return 0. So this is allowed. So you can define the static methods and instance methods as well, but fields or instance variables, they are not allowed. So let me just kind of get rid of it. What else? I had one very interesting thing. Yes, the base class of all records is java.lang.record, so you can't really extend any other class from it. And you can also define add type annotations to it. Let me show you an example where I would have generic records. So I say insert and let me call the class, no, the record as parcel. and let's say the type parameter here is t, and this is two components, which is one is component, which and the other one is a variable of type weight. And let me create a class which is just a placeholder for, let's say, the values that I can pass to it. And this is how I would define my an instance of this generic record. So let me say parcel is equal to new parcel, and I can just pass new table and some random number as the weight. So this is how I could define a generic record and also instantiate it. I can also add annotations to the parameters, the components of a record. So let me just download that one. So that was quick, I would say. Yes. So I can also add annotations to the components of a record. What else can I show you for records? And yes, so we already talked about serializing the records, where I saved the records to a text file and then I read it from there. And the other one is, yes, the records, the data that you store with records, that they are truly immutable. Unlike, I know as a developer, you have kind of hacked into modifying the values of private fields using reflection. You can't do that with records. Let me show you an example. Where is my class? Yes. So this is the class which I already have. I have two methods there, which is this one has this is a regular class which I have a variable which is final and private. So supposed to be immutable data, and I just print out the values, and then using reflection I change the value and print the value again. But for the other method, I have a record which is point, and then I try to change the values using reflection. Let's see if I can do that. Now let me run this class and see what are the values. Running out of time, as usual. Right, so yes, the results will be out soon. Yes, we're there. Yes. Okay, so what do you see here? So we have all four for the window, and let me, yes. So there's an illegal access exception when you try to modify the value of the fields of a record, but not so for the other regular class. So you know when you're working with records that you're actually working with immutable data, which is kind of good. Now, what else can I show you? Yes, I was talking about converting a class to a record to a regular class in case you are working with a Java version which doesn't support record. So I can use my IDE and I can invoke context action and I can say convert record to a class. And bam, here I am. So that's quite simple. I could also do the other way now. So we're done with the records. Now let me move on to pattern matching for instance of. This is again one of my favorite. Please, I would be saying that this is my favorite and the other one is my favorite because all of them are my favorite language features. So let's talk about what it is. So what do I have? Where are the pattern matching? Yes. So now, so what's the old way of using pattern matching for instance of? Let's say I have a method which is output value in uppercase. How can I print out the value of an instance which is passed to this method in uppercase if it is a string? Looks simple. Let's try it out. I can say if object is an instance of, let's say, string. When I'm sharing my screen with Zoom, so there's a kind of lag. Probably it's using a lot of resources. I don't know. So I say object dot cast, and then I say I want to create a variable, and let me call this a string. So this is how I would create a local variable, and then I would just print out um, the value of this in uppercase. Right. So this is what I'm doing now with if I don't use pattern matching for instance of. But what is the problem here? There's an obvious repetition. What would you want to do if you are comparing an instance with a type? Of course, you would try to extract a member which is specific to that type, which would require the casting. So because you are kind of repeating the steps, pattern matching for instance of can help you there. And I can go and I can say replace str with the pattern variable. And I just applied pattern matching for instance of uh, pattern matching for instance of in this code. And this is the pattern variable which I have here, which is not implicitly final in Java 16. It used to be until Java 15. So that's the modifications that we have. Of course, I can also add a keyword here so that it makes it final. Otherwise, I could modify that in the if block. And what is the scope of this variable? Let's say I say else. What can I do? Let me try to print out the value in lowercase. This will not work. If you can see, the error shows that the symbol cannot be resolved because, as I said, it's not in the scope of the else block. What can I do now? Let me create a field. Perfect. So this is good. This is, I would say, a bit confusing because we have a pattern variable here and a string, a field of the same name. And you can see that this refers to the, okay, so this is, I keep forgetting the shortcut. So this refers to, let me shorten this if I can do that. So that's the quick definition window. I don't know why it's so big now. So this defines the place where this variable was defined. And if I go to here, this is the field that I define. Now it's something interesting. Let me just flip the condition here. Let me say, okay. So in this case, you would see that this now refers to the field and this one refers to your pattern variable. This is kind of interesting. That was kind of the semantics that I was talking about, but how you would use pattern matching for instance of, or are we looking at just removing one line of code, or is there more in store? Let me show you an example here. So this is a equals method. I think most of us have either written code this way or seen method which are written this way. So how can I, let's say, make it concise by using pattern matching for instance of? Let's merge the nested if statement and simplify it. So this is how I would say I can modify my existing code, make it more concise by using pattern matching for instance of. So the beauty lies not in removing just one line of code, but being able to probably remove the other lines of codes or apply some other combinations which makes our code concise. If you're still not convinced, let me show you another example. So I have this method here, and let's see how I can modify this one. Okay, so I am replacing letter node with a pattern variable. Now I can see that I have if statements which I can merge. That's great. I can merge this one too. Now, what can I do here? I can replace the loop with collection.remove if. That's perfect. And what can I do here? I can probably inline this variable. So this is kind of cool. And what I just do, I made this code concise. Sorry, Tagir, I just messed up with my um, formatting part in the IDE. So this is how I could modify the code by removing just one line of code. The remaining code could be modified in other ways. So this is what I would say is the magic of using pattern matching for instance of. So whenever you can, please do use it. Now let me go and see what can we talk about text blocks. So 2:11, I think we would finish in time. So yes, so text blocks is another way in which Java can help you define your multi-line strings in a much simpler manner. Why do you want to do that? What is the problem? Let's say, oh my God, I didn't clean up. Sorry. Okay, let's assume that you have a simple and a small string. Let's say, so this is a simpler and a small string. So this looks okay, but what happens? But what happens if this becomes too long to read or see in a single line and blah blah blah? So this is what happens when a line of string is long enough that you can't see it all in one place. So do you think that's a problem? No. As developers, we know that we can simply kind of move it to the next line, which is kind of okay. So you don't need text blocks. What happens if you have a value like this? Let's say you use a string to store your JSON value. How do you do that? So in this case, of course, apart from moving the longer string to the next line, you would also need the escape sequences to escape the double quotes which appear inside the value of string. And this is where the problem kind of starts, not ends, starts, because now it's difficult for me to read the JSON value that I have. Of course, I can use language injection and blah, blah, blah in IntelliJ IDEA, but I still want to read my code in much more readable form if that is possible. This is what text blocks can do. Dun, dun. Can you see how simple it is for me to kind of focus on the value that it has and not focus on the formatting part that I would need to make that code readable? And this is what the text blocks is in Java. It's not another type of string. We are still using java.lang.string. So this is the magic for developers, and we have the compiler doing all the work here. So what else? One other interest, okay, before we talk about the language injection, the text blocks, unlike a regular string, they start with 3 double quotes. I know, a tongue twister, but that's how it is. So we start a text block with 3 double quotes and end it with the 3 double quotes. So that's the delimiter that we have. And you can't start the value of a text block right after the 3 opening double quotes. That's a syntax error or a compilation error. So it has to be on the next line. That's a requirement that we have. And what about the white spaces? I'm not sure if you can see the vertical line that moves when I move the opening brace for this value. So this is how IntelliJ IDEA would tell me the value that would be included as part of the variable myJSON. And you can move this and see how it moves. So the white spaces that appear in your text block You can define how you want to see them, whether you want to include them, whether you want to exclude them. And it also applies to the leading and the trailing new line and the white spaces that you have for the text blocks. I don't remember, it's either backslash s or backslash, just the backslash and backslash s, where you can remove and drop the trailing spaces and the new line that you have at the end of each line in text block. The other interesting thing is I can inject language or reference in a text block the way I can do for my string values. So let's inject value. So the type that I'm using here, data is of type JSON. And what happens now is I can get the regular help by my IDE, which not just highlights the errors, but I can also get code completion, things like that. So I was missing a comma there, but now I can fix it here. And as I mentioned, this is still the regular string, and we're not talking about a new data type here. So what else do I have? Language injections, of course, a way to use. So, of course, you can use this not only for the JSON values. I know as developers, we use strings, the data type string, to store multiple type of other values, including, of course, JSON, as we just saw. We also use it for HTML and our SQL queries to define probably code in some other language, and just long strings, which could have quotes as well. So when you are using text blocks, the value themselves could have single double quote. I know it's a tongue twister. So you can use it at a lot of places. So that was for text blocks. We have 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Now the last part of the session, that the last topic that I would be covering is the switch expression. So now let me go on to my IDE and see how we can use it. I would not be taking a lot of time because we're running out of time. Imagine that I have an enum which has these values. How would I want to iterate over the values of this enum and, let's say, calculate a value based on the constant value which is passed to this method and return back a value? So as you can see, there is obvious repetition here. And as we talked about with pattern matching, for instance, of whenever we see an obvious repetition, that's a perfect place for any improvements that we have. So we are repeating a lot of code here. So, and the other problem with the regular switch statements was, if I do not include a break statement here, I fall through the next switch branch, which could be a logical error, could be intentional. So that was unclear. So with switch expressions, I can get rid of it. I no longer need to use all these lines of code to calculate and return a value. As the name says, switch expression. So an expression is something, as you know, can return a value. So let's see how it has changed. When I say Alt and Enter, I can replace this with a switch expression. What else can I do here? I can inline the variable. So this is how I can change the code that I had. In this case, I can drop the default clause because I have an exhaustive list of values for an enum. But that would not work if I'm kind of iterating on a type, let's say int, which would not have an exhaustive list of values. I can also combine two case labels in a single branch, which is great as well. And what else can you do? Can you only return a value, or could you also, let's say, do anything else? Let's say if you say int a is equal to 10, and then you can also go out for a walk. And then you just return a value by using some number. So this is how the switch expressions work. They return a value for you. They can not only return a single value, you can compute values in a branch. You can have multiple cases in the same branch. So this is how it does. Of course, you can also throw exceptions from the case table, but I think we're running out of time. And um, I I probably missed some points regarding IntelliJ IDEA or the feature, but you can check out the blog post that I already have on these features on this link, and also the screencast, which could help you know more about it. And I would quickly want to touch upon what a preview language feature is. When Java had the older release cadence, which was around 3 to 4 years or 2 to 4 years, they could test out the new changes, and they had enough time to test that out, get the feedback, and make the changes if required. But with the 6 months release cadence, it is not easy to get the feedback and make the changes. Uh, that's, I would say, not possible. So, what happens is the new language features are introduced as a preview language feature. They are not incomplete, but they are not yet permanent in the language, because it's important to understand that unlike an API, which can be deprecated in the future or it could be taken off, that doesn't happen with the language feature. Once it goes into the language, it's permanent there. So it's important that the feedback is taken care of before the feature is made permanent in the language. So the features introduced with the preview language feature, you have to enable them to use them with compilation and with the runtime using some command line parameters. Of course, when you're using IntelliJ IDEA, that does it behind the scenes when you set the language and the project level to a certain Java language. So this is an old tweet by Brian, but of course he leads the project Amber at Oracle, which talks about the changes to the Java language. And he said, of course, please feel free to give your feedback on the latest Java language feature. I asked, is there a particular date? He said no, but of course, the sooner, the better. So there is no date, but of course, the sooner that you give the language, that's good. So thank you, everyone, for listening to the session. And I hoped you could pick at least one or two of the features that I mentioned, and I hope that you would be able to use them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mala, for a wonderful talk. We actually have about 5 minutes for questions, and there are some questions from the audience. The first one is sealed classes in Java were inspired by sealed classes from Kotlin?
So the target, I would say that's the kind of questions that I get almost every time. Like, is Java copying Kotlin, or is Java kind of copying the other language or feature from the other thing? So I would say it's good to be inspired by any other feature which is doing good or any other language, but Brian would be able to answer that question better. But my answer would be, if any feature is being added into the language, that I would call that an evolution of the language. And it's good that Java is adding new features to it, which are helpful for the developers.
And more general question related to the previous one. What do you think? Is the new, shorter Java release cycle was a result of growing popularity of Kotlin and other JVM languages?
Again, I would think Brian is a better person to answer this question, but I would strongly believe, yes, I was talking with Brian, and he was talking about that developers are not really happy with the very long release cycle that they had already. So they talked about and having a new, shorter release cadence, so that the features they can be used by the developers. And he also mentioned that it seemed like a very big task initially, because what happens, as we know, when the release is set to go out, people are in the office kind of taking care of the release. But with the shorter releases, I think it's working out very well, both for Java and the developers. And the other point that I would like to mention is the pace of evolution is the same. It's just the pace of the release cadence has changed. So we get to see the features sooner, but it has been evolving at the same rate.
Great, yeah. Unfortunately, we weren't managed to invite Brian to this conference. We tried, but he declined. He said that he had not enough time for this. And do you know anything about upcoming Java releases like Java 17? Is anything already planned? Any cool feature?
I think I saw there was a tweet by I don't remember the name, but the link was to one of the discussions on the Amber mailing list, which talked about the pattern matching being extended to switch expressions, and also how it would be applied to the deconstructors for records. So I don't think any date has been announced for that feature, but we hope to see that in Java 17, because a lot of work is already on progress on this feature. And if that comes in Java 17 as a preview language feature, I would be very excited.
Yes, that would be really cool.
Yes.
I also don't know the exact timing, and probably nobody knows, because sometimes Oracle just announces that something will be in the next Java version, when they pull back and say, we cannot do this in time, so it's postponed.
Absolutely.
Yes. And, I was actually very happy to see how you did that transformations with pattern matching that narrow the code, so you can basically write equals as a one-liner.
Yes. Absolutely. And Taki, this is one of the very interesting features, because when any developer sees this feature, they say, oh, I can just get rid of one line, which is okay, kind of cool. I don't have to use it. But when they see how they can use it with the other, how they can move their code around by just getting rid of that one line of code, then it becomes interesting.
Yes, exactly. So, thank you, Mala, for your wonderful talk. And dear listeners, if you have more questions to Mala, you can meet her in the discussion zone. She will join right after the talk. And now here we will have a talk by our partner, Huawei, about high-performance computing. And in half an hour, here will be the Spark workshop by Pasha Finkelstein, also from JetBrains. So don't go away, at least for too long time. Stay tuned. And thank you again, Mala, for your participation. Your talk was wonderful.
Thank you so much, Taki. Thank you so much for having me. And of course, it's always a pleasure to talk with you.